Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report, the 2018 Prophetic Year in Review, Part 1. In many ways, 2018 was the best year we've had in a long time, especially in the United States. We've had high employment and increased wages. There was a new trend towards actually building products in the U.S. instead of just importing them. As Charles Dickens said, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It was a year of constant rage. There were a stunning number of mass killings. Protests turned violent. Political rhetoric became red hot with accusations of rape and even murder. The moral foundation that once undergirded America's liberty continued to erode. But these things were not limited to the United States. It was happening simultaneously the world over. There were record levels of drug use and record numbers of suicides. These illustrate the increasing mental anguish of the world's citizens. On today's program, we begin a two-part series looking back at 2018 in the light of Bible prophecy. We'll start with the technology firms that seem to be invading every aspect of our lives. In mid-December, the New York Times reported on a deal Facebook made with fellow tech giants such as Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Spotify, and Netflix. The Times wrote, Facebook allowed Microsoft's Bing search engine to see the names of virtually all Facebook users, friends without consent. The records show and gave Netflix and Spotify the ability to read Facebook users' private messages. The reporters learned these things from leaked internal documents. The Times article went on to say that Facebook permitted Amazon to obtain users' names and contact information through their friends, and it let Yahoo view streams of friends' posts as recently as this summer, despite public statements that it had stopped that type of sharing years earlier. Facebook also chose to partner with some nefarious companies. They made a deal to share your data with Huawei, China's version of Google. But Huawei has direct ties to the Chinese government officials and the Communist Party. This is another case of Chinese corruption rubbing off on the U.S. corporations. Facebook also made a deal with Yandex, a Russian firm with known ties to the Kremlin. It gave Facebook user IDs to Yandex. The fallout from these revelations was swift. In the days after the Times revelation, Facebook's stock value plunged more than $10 billion. Things were already going badly for Facebook. Then, the last half of 2018, the company's stock price fell over $200 billion. How big is that? The loss equaled the entire value of Netflix, Twitter, Snapchat, and Sony combined. The stock of the big tech companies took a beating in 2018. But their reach into every aspect of modern life continued to grow like nothing before in human history. And they're building the infrastructure of a future despotic government. The government of Antichrist and the false prophet will watch its citizens' every move, including what they read and learn. Facebook is just one of the technology companies whose falling value at the end of 2018 threatened to bring the United States into another recession. On January 3rd, 2019, Apple shares broke all records, but in the wrong direction. They fell a staggering 10% in that one day. Apple announced that iPhone sales would be lower than expected in China and several other countries. Apple CEO Tim Cook blamed trade tensions with China and China's weakening economy. And China is just one of the many countries now suffering major economic woes. As a result, people in these countries can't afford Apple's expensive phones. Since October 1st, Apple shares have fallen $446 billion. That's 39%. How big is that? Apple losses in 3 months are triple the entire value of McDonald's. For the overall U.S. stock market, 2018 was the worst year in a decade. Ominously, most of that loss occurred in 1 month, December. Once again, planet Earth seems to be teetering on the edge of a global depression. I'm not saying that it will happen, but if it does, it could happen quickly. This has important end times implications. Economic uncertainty will be a major factor in bringing about a one world government and the reign of Antichrist. Jesus warned of increased pestilence in the time before his return. Even a few years ago, no one could have foreseen a kind of pestilence that now threatens the world: computer viruses. As 2018 came to an end, a computer virus hit Tribune Publishing. It severely impacted major newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times, the San Diego Union Tribune, and the Chicago Tribune. It was one more reminder that in a computer-driven world, we are more and more vulnerable to computer malware. Like a biological virus, a computer virus makes copies of itself, and it is highly contagious. One machine can infect thousands. There is a constant game of cat and mouse between the authorities and computer hackers. Some hackers are little more than low-budget terrorists. They sometimes blackmail their victims. At other times, they simply do harm for harm's sake. But sometimes it is more. Sometimes it is an act of war. In March of 2018, Bloomberg reported Russian hackers are conducting a broad assault on the U.S. electric grid, water processing plants, air transportation facilities, and other targets in rolling attacks on some of the country's most sensitive infrastructure. An attack on a community's water system could kill thousands. An attack on the nation's power grid could send the nation into a new dark age. Almost every day, countries like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran probe the weaknesses in the computer running the infrastructure of the United States. We don't know what weaknesses they may have already found, but the battle is on. Sometimes hackers use their computer skills to silence those who disagree with them. A fellow minister recently posted an article on his ministry's website. It identified homosexual behavior as a sin. A liberal hacker group attacked the site with a massive denial of service attack. It crashed his website and others on the same server. 2018 also saw conventional viruses. In January, Bloomberg ran a story headlined, "Flu season from hell keeps getting worse." It got so bad that major hospitals were forced to set up tents in their parking lots to handle the huge caseload. And this year, the ominous H1N1 flu is back. 100 years ago, that flu killed as many as 100 million people. We don't know yet how bad this flu season will be, but every year it is a roll of the dice. An even bigger pestilence problem is bacterial. In 2013, the United Kingdom's Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davies, warned the world of a coming superbug apocalypse. In 2018, the superbug arrived in a big way. In March, CBS News reported experts estimate that 700,000 people die around the world each year from drug-resistant superbugs, and they expect the number to grow sharply. In the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates 23,000 people die each year from drug-resistant infections, a number that could spike to 2 million a year if the problem isn't addressed. Jesus prophesied a coming time of pestilence. That time has arrived. In February, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a new generation of Russian weapons, including a cruise missile that flies 10 times the speed of sound. It is nuclear powered and carries a nuclear payload. It has practically unlimited range. The first known attempts to test the missile were catastrophic failures. But just as 2018 was ending, Russia finally launched what looks like a successful test. Putin said it would become part of Russian arsenal in 2019. The Washington Post reported the new weapon, dubbed the Avant-Garde, is of a type that the Pentagon has been both working on and worrying about as an arms race emerges among the United States, Russia, and China for missiles that can maneuver easily and travel far faster than the speed of sound. Russian military analyst Alexander GOLTS said this is the start of a new Cold War. In April, President Trump tweeted, "Our relationship with Russia is worse now than it has ever been, and that includes the Cold War." DMITRI TRENIN is an analyst of the Carnegie Moscow Center. He said, "For the foreseeable future, it looks like the U.S.-Russia agenda will be limited to just one item, war prevention." Good luck to us all. Bible prophecy does not seem to mention the United States. Therefore, by the time of the tribulation, something must happen to vastly reduce its influence. Could it be war with Russia, China, or maybe the European Union? In January, European Union laws went into effect that allowed government officials increased access to the citizens' financial records. This was promoted as an anti-money laundering law, but it has broader implications for a future totalitarian state. In October, the European Court of Human Rights applied a portion of Sharia law to the entire continent. It started when an Austrian woman called Mohammed a pedophile. In a closed seminar, the speaker noted that Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl and consummated the marriage when the girl reached 9. She was correct, but in Europe, being right or truthful no longer matters. Neither does freedom of religion nor freedom of speech. The court ruled that saying these true things about Muhammad could stir up prejudice and put at risk religious peace. Writing for the Gatestone Institute, Judith Bergman said, "The real message the ECHR sent as it succumbed to the fears of disturbing the religious peace is that if threats work, keep threatening." In other words, Muslims are able to get their way in Europe with threats of violence. By giving in to such tactics, Europe ensures that such threats will continue. The court's ruling was like the Spanish Inquisition all over again, except this time they're protecting Islam instead of the Catholic Church. Could similar blasphemy laws be enacted in the United States? Many of our establishment politicians see Europe as a model culture. Using government power to enforce Islamic law is already in practice in Europe. Late in the year, Europe's 2 most powerful leaders endorsed the idea of a massive new army of Europe. In early November, French President Emmanuel Macron said, "We will not protect the Europeans unless we decide to have a true European army." He said Europe needed an army to protect the continent, with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States of America. Later, in a speech televised across Europe, Germany's Angela Merkel also endorsed the proposal. This is important because the Antichrist will rise to power in Europe, and he will command a powerful European military, one that does not yet exist, but soon will. In May, President Trump withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal. Critics predicted catastrophe, but Iran continued to abide by the deal, at least as much as it did before the U.S. left it. The problem is that it was such a bad deal. It ensured that Iran would have nuclear weapons in the future, and it made cheating on the deal easy for them. The administration's sanctions are already having an effect on Iran's economy. President Trump hopes it will be strong enough to bring them back to the negotiating table. In 2018, we also learned of the existence of Iran's atomic archive. The archive proves that all the key public pronouncements of Iranian leaders in the run-up to the deal were lies. Israeli intelligence operatives located a cache of material in Tehran that contained some of Iran's most closely guarded nuclear secrets. But the Israelis didn't just expose the existence of the atomic archive. They stole it. They loaded it up and hauled it back to Jerusalem. Chief among the deceivers was the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. He had said, "The Islamic Republic has never been after nuclear weapons." It was a lie. The archive proves that Iran's massive nuclear program was already fully underway at the time Khamenei said they were never after such weapons. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani told the United Nations General Assembly, "Nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction contradict our fundamental religious and ethical convictions." He was saying that nuclear weapons contradict his faith, his devotion to Allah. He could not have made a stronger statement, but it was a lie. Meanwhile, Iran continues to move further into the arms of Russia, and that fits Bible prophecy to a T. China has the second largest military budget in the world. They now spend 5 times as much on their military as the United Kingdom. As 2018 came to an end, a Chinese ship was seen armed with what appears to be a railgun. Conventional artillery propels projectiles using gunpowder or cardite. A railgun uses electromagnetism to fire projectiles at 5 times the speed of sound. That makes it range significantly greater than conventional weapons. Both the United States and Russia are working on similar systems. China is also in the late development stage of the HD-1 supersonic anti-ship missiles. It's known as the aircraft carrier killer. This seems to be a bid for naval supremacy over the U.S. 2019 began with China landing a probe on the dark side of the moon. But China's main goals in space are military in nature. In 2018, China continued development of space weapons designed to destroy U.S. satellites. Much of the military capability of the United States is based on such satellites. In 2018, China ramped up its efforts to silence the voice of the church. It imposed even more brutal restrictions on Christians meeting together, using Bibles, and on what they teach their children. China seems to be giving us a prototype of a new, technologically advanced totalitarian state. Surveillance is everywhere, and speech constantly monitored. All of this repression is enforced by the police and the military. When Jesus listed signs of his soon return in Luke 21, he added, "But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you." It's not surprising that a world that worships Satan would hate Christ and Christians. According to the 2018 World Watch List from Open Doors, 215 million Christians experience high levels of persecution in the countries on the World Watch List. This represents 1 in 12 Christians worldwide. 2018 saw the passing of many key spiritual leaders and giants. Among them were my friends Billy Graham, Chuck Missler, and Ralph Wilkerson. Billy Graham preached to live audiences of almost 250 million people. No one knows how many more he ministered to by means of television, radio, newspaper, magazines, and books. Billy once said, "This is not mass evangelism, but personal evangelism on a mass scale." He came within a few months of living 100 years. During most of our lives, he was a constant. He often said, "We can solve our problems at the foot of the cross." It's true. And the wonderful thing is, you can do it anytime, wherever you are. The Bible tells us that we must simply call upon the name of Jesus to be saved. Romans chapter 10 verse 9 says, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." Do it now. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. Next week, I'll continue with part 2 of the Prophetic Year in Review 2018. God willing, I'll see you then.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.